from the internet. It's ZN Live.
And then live.
Welcome to episode 392. I'm Phil Weiss, CEO and founder of ZN. Co-hosting with me today is Irem, who is a senior director at ZN, but also a strategic thinker and a movie buff. And our very special guest today is Andrew Strohelein, who is a very experienced communicator with over 25 years of working experience in different fields. He is a spokesperson for Human Rights Watch, and he has been doing very interesting work. He's also an influencer, somebody with a lot of reach across different channels. And Andrew, thank you for joining us on a very busy day. I want to start first with your actual how you are approaching this social media landscape in 2024. We talked about this last year. There were a lot of changes in the air. People were talking about abandoning X in large numbers. It hasn't really happened. So where are you now on social media? Where are you spending your time and focus?
Yeah, I think, thanks, Phil. I think last year we were really talking about what everyone had to do is kind of experiment with all the different platforms and really test out, could they find audiences and have some engagement on Mastodon or Blue Sky or whatever, and to do a lot of testing. And I still think we're kind of in that phase. Maybe we're never really outside of that phase because we're always learning. I'm definitely spending less time on Twitter than I used to. I mean, Twitter used to be a major part of my job, and it's not really so much anymore. X now is it's turned so much to the dark side. It's even worse than it used to be, and it doesn't. Most importantly, really, it doesn't kind of reach. It doesn't always reach the kind of audiences I want to reach. I mean, sometimes it still does. It still gets some important journalists who engage with the material, either just simply retweeting it or liking or whatever, but more importantly getting in touch with me and asking me about that subject. But I spend a lot more time now on Instagram with videos of my daily newsletter on human rights, and I spend a lot more time on Blue Sky and Mastodon and LinkedIn. Actually, LinkedIn I'm spending an enormous amount of time on as well. It's been the engagement on LinkedIn has been much more substantive. Like, you get people talking a lot more seriously. There's a lot less just this kind of back and forth and sniping and kind of nastiness that you get on some of the other platforms.
Yeah, so just to get a better understanding, because I was checking your content on X. It's still quite a lot of reach, and some of the videos are getting quite a lot of views, at least if you trust the numbers you're seeing there. How are you doing on the clones, Blue Sky, Threads, Mastodon? We talked about that. You were getting some good engagement. Are you still spending time there, or have you just said, okay, I'm now really X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and newsletter? So what's the mix?
Okay, so I guess we have to kind of go back to the kind of original product for me every day is my newsletter. So like that's the key thing. So I do a daily newsletter. It's whatever it's about 300, 400 words or something like that. It turns into we turn it into a video. It's translated into 3 languages, and then we put it across all these different platforms, audio and video. So it ends up being in 10 or 12 different places in different languages and formats and whatnot. And the whole point is to reach all these different audiences and to try to kind of explain some of these, international affairs and human rights issues in more accessible terms for a wider audience. Sometimes, that works really well. And some of these videos have, we've had videos that get 200,000 views across the platforms. That's really good. More ordinarily, it's tens of thousands. So I'm pretty satisfied with that. I think the video has been good, but we've only been doing that for a few months. Before that, we were pushing the audio. We're now trying to turn the English audio into some kind of podcast by beefing it up a little bit and seeing how that will do on various platforms. So it's the strategy is really understanding that there are different audiences out there who prefer different platforms for different reasons, working in different languages, understand these issues at different levels, and trying to reach them with a product that explains things a little bit more for people who are not necessarily familiar with the terms and where we're working, and to put it in places where they're going to be. And so the team has been working on that, for the last 2 years, basically. And I think that kind of strategy of taking a core product and then, dividing it up into all these ancillary products and platforms has really worked for us. I mean, we're really finding a lot of engagement from, and this is important for us, new users, right? Everybody who's interested in human rights and international affairs and these sorts of things is already familiar with Human Rights Watch, but we're trying to kind of reach out to new audiences and get other folks interested in what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. And we've actually applied a similar approach to our newsletter, which is the starting point of all the content. So it's a weekly newsletter, and then we have all the content, and that content then gets posted at different moments. But it's kind of, you bring it together, you have your plan centered around that, and then the different channels are, where different conversations might be. So I think that's a very interesting approach, and it structures you, and I think it structures the communication for you, because you have a clear flow around that. And I think we found the same.
It definitely structures the day as well. I tell you, I mean, we have very set deadlines across the day of when all these things happen and whatnot. So it's really, it's quite intense sometimes.
Now on X, I just want to come back on that, because it's still, in our analysis, it's still the main political place. I mean, that's where Joe Biden resigned. That's where announcements are still made as a kind of, go-to place, even from people who don't like it. And I have in mind this idea that, even when Rupert Murdoch is running 25 newspapers, it doesn't mean you stop speaking to journalists in those newspapers, because they get to the audience. And I think Elon Musk is a kind of Rupert Murdoch for Twitter. And basically, you still might want to use the platform to get the message out. But what I want to ask you is have you observed a genuine change in polarization? Because people said he's moved the platform to the right. Is it true, or are there just simply lots of ecosystems? Now, we know he's associating himself with the right, the far right, but do you see a change in the people that engage with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things going on. One is, as you mentioned, he has personally kind of moved things that he's talking about, and voices that he's amplified in that direction, for one. But I think people who left, and people I know who left the platform, don't engage anymore because they were just getting sick of it, or they didn't like Musk or whatever, tended to be from the other side of whatever the political spectrum, if you want to call it, and so that kind of tilted the balance as well. So it's not simply what Musk is doing; it's that what Musk is doing has sent some people away onto other platforms. I mean, that all said, like, here's the real problem, Phil. The real problem with Twitter, X, whatever, is that Human Rights Watch has 5 million followers on, or more than 5 million followers on Twitter, on the English language main account, Human Rights Watch. 5 million. We tweet something, we get, tens of engagements, tens of likes, and retweets or reposts. I mean, that's just not real. We know it's not, and it's not just us. I'm not saying we are being throttled. We know everybody's being throttled. Like we have 5 million people who signed up to receive these alerts from us, who are interested in human rights, who want to know about this stuff. They've voted to hear about this stuff, and they're not hearing about it, right? So this is the way the algorithms are working, and it's just cutting out these voices. It's okay, fine. Some of those 5 million may no longer be on the platform, or some of those 5 million are interested in other things or whatever. But still, if you have 5 million followers and you put something out there, and a dozen people look at it, there's something seriously wrong. This is, and we don't think it's honestly, we don't think it's us, because these people signed up to get our stuff, right? And they're not getting it, and that's that's the main problem with the platform for me. Personally, I have 125,000 followers or whatnot, and again, who knows how many of those are still on the platform. But I tweet out something, and it's rare these days. 5 years ago, you tweet something out, 100,000, 1,500 was retweets would be fairly common. You'd get a couple of those a day, or at least half a dozen a week or whatever. And now just not so much. And again, I'm doing the self introspection here. I don't think it's us. Like, I think people signed up for this stuff. I think they wanted to receive it, and I just don't think people are getting it, and that's a real problem. And I don't know how to break that. Like, I don't know how to get around that.
I saw recently, Andrew, that you posted about potentially adding distressing content warnings to some of the posts or newsletters, because obviously some of them describe very horrific and disturbing situations.
Yeah.
How do you strike a balance between emotional storytelling and factual reporting when you're building your advocacy messages or your newsletters?
Sure. Well, I'm just on the content warning. I mean, we're a human rights organization, and we're reporting on human rights violations all over the world. Now, if I say human rights violations, that sounds very kind of whatever, cold and antiseptic, right? It's not. It's a term that people can sort of read without thinking too much about it. If I actually describe the horrific crimes that are going on, then it's difficult. And it really goes down to audience, right? Everything starts with understanding your audience, and we have several audiences. One audience for Human Rights Watch is, of course, like policy people who are already working on this stuff, and they're working on it in the EAS, or they're working on it in the State Department or whatever. They can read the details, and it's still shocking, but it's part of the job to do that. Whereas when we're trying to reach a wider audience, or audiences who are not used to seeing this and dealing with these kinds of things every day, we have to be extremely careful. I mean, like, you can't hide what's happening here. Children being tortured to death, right? We wrote about yesterday. How much detail do you give in that? I mean, this is what's really happening. You don't want to hide it. You don't want to cover it up. But how much do you think people can take before either A, they turn off, or they don't want to deal with it because it's so horrific? For people who don't deal with this every day, we have to take their we have to meet them where they are. Like with all communications, you have to meet people where they are in their headspace. So it's a difficult thing, and we literally have these discussions every single day about the daily brief that Human Rights Watch does, and about every product we do. The Human Rights Watch daily brief really, it feeds off of all of our research and all of our people on the ground all over the world, and even in some of our reports, we have to decide what to do. Those photographs, so that do we print those in the report? Do we publish those in the report, or do we say, we have archived these photos, if anyone wants to look at them, we will share them, but we're not going to kind of make them publicly available because it's shows mutilation of dead bodies, so we have these questions, and we try to work through these things, and it's not always easy, but we do also have to kind of get people to understand that there is the balance between emotion and making an emotional argument. One of the things I do in my daily brief is write about one person and their experience and what happened to them, or them and their family, or whatever. And that can be very effective because people can see the world through their eyes, and it's much more relatable than talking about, international regulations and international law and whatnot, right? It's just much more relatable. Here's a person, they have a family, and they did this. But if you get into too much detail, then you're going to turn people off because it's really quite horrific.
Yeah, I think, like most people in communication, you have to balance the details, the facts with the emotion. I think that, that's the big conversation. It's like, how much emotion are you going to give the story? And it's not just in what you're reporting, it's how you report it. It's like,
yes,
do you have to, are you going to be a journalist who's trying to look neutral when you're saying these kids have been murdered or something like that? Or are you trying to convey that? And I have, one other question, which is obviously, at some degree that the more emotional you are, the more reach you potentially have. I think, from everything, all the data we see, if you push that button harder, it gets, engagement both ways. People agree, disagree, they fight, but it amplifies the conversation. So, and I think, in Brussels, there's the kind of technical thing, like, okay, we just give the facts and give the reports, and that's our job. But then it's like, okay, but if you start getting very excited, like a lot of American YouTubers who are going to talk about the most obscure technical thing with incredible emotion. So imagine if they were in such a charged territory. So are you thinking, okay, maybe we need to bring the whole emotion to 3 levels up? Or you're saying, look, our job is really the policy people and the experts, so we need to stay out of that? Or it's just a personal view that you say, look, I don't want to do this because I think it just makes things worse?
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes it's just a personal. It's like I just don't want to get involved in atrocity, what they call in the business, sorry, atrocity porn, right? So you don't. That's just not us. It's not what responsible organizations do. So that's relatively straightforward. Like we have. I go back to the core issue. The first question you always ask yourself with every communications project is, who are the audiences? And we have very diverse audiences, right? Across languages, across cultures, across class, across everything. And we do have a policy audience. So we are trying to reach people in foreign ministries around the world. We are trying to reach people in interior ministries and whatnot. We're trying to reach international agencies, right? And when we talk to them, we can talk in a language that is, really quite different than the language you have to speak to a more general public that can be very educated, can be very intelligent, but just doesn't necessarily understand the particular issues. I'll give you a really good example. So we're talking about the ICC. So the Ukraine is about to join the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and they've taken a step towards doing that with some the ratification of some laws in Parliament. So that's good news, by the way. But so the person I was talking to was saying, oh yeah, so Ukraine will deposit its instrument in the coming days or the coming weeks or whatever. And I was like, I mean, I'm in the business. I barely understand that. Deposit the instrument. Like, what is that? What does that mean? Like so it just means basically, you're going to the Secretary General and saying, we're going to do this. We're going to join the ICC. But it's this phraseology that gets used in this kind of jargon that nobody bats an eye at in Brussels or Geneva or London, Paris, Washington. But like, it's very confusing to people who don't speak that language. So we're trying to reach that group. We're trying to reach other groups. We're trying to reach people in different languages. And we have to be very careful because the knowledge level of people in France about, say, I don't know, West Africa, Mali or something, right? We're talking about Mali. People in France have a better understanding of what's happening in Mali than, say, people who speak English in the United States, right? So we have to kind of balance these things out and make adjustments and changes to all of these things to kind of reach these whatever, not micro audiences, but smaller audiences differently. There is no general kind of public. There's not everybody, right? You can't reach everybody with the same sort of message. You really have to kind of think about who the target is in each instance.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting challenge and a balance that many people have to do. But I think in your case, it's even more dramatic than in most cases. But in terms of, we talked about emotion, atrocity porn, the way the conversation on social media has become more polarized. That was a big topic, I think, as we now talk about mental health. And I think, this sharing these traumatic stories day in, day out, it just, whatever the story, it just makes people just feel completely depressed. And it's a horrible thing. What I wanted to ask you is on the topics that are incredibly very charged, very difficult for anyone on any side of the issue. Do you think it's still possible to have kind of respectful conversations? And when you see what you're engaged with, does the EU perhaps compare differently from the US, for example? I mean, what I'm seeing from my perspective is that the political discussions in the US seem to all go into incredible polarization from the beginning. It's like, however trivial it is, like, okay, this is like, I hate everybody else who disagrees with me. I feel that in the EU we're not quite there. There's more hope. Am I being optimistic, deluded, or
well, I don't know. I mean, go. So I was tweeting about Germany deporting Afghan asylum seekers back to Afghanistan this morning, the first time they've done so since the Taliban's retaken power there 3 years ago. An absolutely appalling decision. I mean, people in Afghanistan, the Taliban, murders them, just executes them, just forcibly disappears them. People just disappear. So it's not a place that you should be deporting people to. And so I said, well, this is a bad idea, or I said, whatever, this is a mistake, whatever. And the amount of the attacks that I got from some that maybe are apparently inside Germany or not are pretty rough. It's like basically they're saying, yes, people should be tortured and murdered because I don't want them here in my country. This is problematic, obviously, on international law terms. You're not supposed to send people back to repatriate people back to places where they might be tortured or murdered, and it's just pretty problematic on moral terms. But you get people making these arguments, and if you look at the German language stuff, oh boy. So if you, right now we're ahead of these kind of crucial state elections in Germany, and if you look at some of the just dipped into some of the German language stuff on this issue myself, and yeah, it's not any better than any of the American garbage that you see. It's really it's sadly similar. I think polarization in the U.S. has obviously been ratcheting up, as we approach the elections, the U.S. elections. That just presidential elections the election campaign season seems to be about 4 years, and it's just builds and builds and builds and builds and kind of dominates everything. It does have its effects in other parts of the world, but I don't think, unfortunately, we are as immune to this stuff as I would like. I wish we were in the EU.
So what you're saying basically, polarization is happening everywhere.
I think it's happening here, and I think if you dig into issues, just go into this one issue of the deportation of these Afghans back into the arms of the Taliban. Go to that issue, go across Twitter, and then have a look at what people are saying in German about it, and it's depressing stuff. It's not there are a lot of loud, screamy voices that are, basically okay with torture, which is not encouraging.
Yeah, so I think a lot of concerns there. With the EU election, we were anticipating, a lot of people were saying there was going to be a lot of AI deepfakes and floods of misinformation. Again, to maybe try to look for a more optimistic side to this, I don't think we've seen as much as anticipated, and my personal view is that it hasn't had a huge impact. Everybody was saying there's going to be crazy amounts of fake information, deepfakes, etc. That doesn't seem to have happened. Misinformation, I also think that to some degree we've been, gotten more used to it, so it maybe doesn't have the same potency. What do you think about that? And are you optimistic about some of the social media trends going forward?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, it's, in a way, the warnings worked, right? So, I think there was so much concern about it and so much interest in it and people trying to explain it and discuss it and whatnot, that I think some of that helped. It helped people be a bit more skeptical, right? And that's a good thing. I mean, we have seen some fakes, hit the U.S. election recently, and that's, some of them just weird, to be honest. But I think you're right in that it didn't quite hit quite as hard as everybody thought it might. But there are more elections to go, and we'll see how this stuff unfolds. But I do think we have to get people used to examining these things with a bit of skepticism. Problem is, of course, with that is that people get so skeptical that they never allow anything new or different that they don't already believe inside their head, right? It's like, well, that can't be true because because it's not what I believe, which is, you also see an enormous amount of online in social media conversations, right? It's just like, well, that can't be true because, obviously it doesn't fit in with my worldview. It's like, okay. The facts are, everybody loves the fact. Everybody says they love the facts. Everyone says they just want the facts. But of course, they really just mean that they want facts that fit into their narrative of how they see the world. So that's another real communications challenge that we have, and I think we'll continue to have, and then the deepfakes thing will really kind of fold into that. We're just going to have to kind of address these issues, have people be skeptical, but also open to facts that don't meet their worldview, and that's always been difficult.
Yeah, I think teaching critical thinking. Go ahead, Iram. Yeah.
Sorry, about the skepticism, actually, it's quite interesting indeed. Like, with more and more people being more skeptical, how do you tailor your communication efforts to come across credible and sincere?
Well, I think, we have the advantage with Human Rights Watch. We have a reputation for providing facts, for having researchers on the ground. And this is really a boost to any conversation.
Credibility.
Yeah, it's a boost to credibility. It's the foundation of all our work. It's like, we can say this because we were there. We can say this about these, even in cases we weren't there. We can say this about these satellite photos because we have a team of people who are analyzing these satellite photos. We have experts, we have people on the ground, we have people actually collecting basic information, which is unlike, off the top of my head, 99% of people on social media who have an opinion and will relay other people's facts, perhaps, but again, only if they fit in their worldview. But they're not on the ground collecting information themselves, and sometimes they are. If something happens in their location, in their street, and they can turn on their camera, and those things go viral for a day. But for the most part, most people aren't researchers. Most people's job isn't to collect facts. So we have this we have this reputation for reliability, for credibility, for being close to the facts and being able to explain things. Now, of course, lots of people disparage our name as well, but it's usually governments who we're reporting on, and they really don't like us reporting on them. So, scratch the surface of a lot of criticism of Human Rights Watch, and you'll find governments who are really unhappy that we've exposed their atrocity crimes and whatnot. So, yeah, I think when people see the name Human Rights Watch, it still means something. I think it still has that credibility. I think that gives us an advantage when we publish things. It gives us an advantage when we walk into meetings in foreign ministries, and it gives us an advantage when we talk to journalists, and it gives us an advantage online in social media, whether it's a video on Instagram or a tweet on Twitter X. I mean, it's like, I just think that is that is our most important aspect of what we do, is having that credibility, maintaining that credibility. If we make a mistake, we publish it on our website, say, hey, we made a mistake and we made a correction, and here it is. We are just absolutely dedicated to the facts in these cases, and people know that.
It's interesting because I think you're stressing the importance of reputation, and in the commercial world, the brand, which is how can you trust this organization to say whatever, and again, you might agree or disagree, but at least you say, okay, this is the consistent set of values that this organization has had over the years. And I think telling that story and demonstrating it is the most important thing, because then it's like, who the hell are you? And what do you know about this kind of thing? Again, whatever the opinion you might have. And I think that comes to the importance of learning to critically think and say, okay, where does this information come from? And how can I verify or kind of challenge it? And how can I have multiple sources that I reasonably trust? Because I think it's good to be skeptical across all information sources. But of course, you also want to be able to say what's the most probable explanation that I have to live with, because then I go and join the flat earthers and we never come back. Now, with everything you said, I want to come back to, when you meet a young person who says, I want to work in this fantastic world of communication online, but you just said to me that everything was so hard. Do you tell them, go and do something else? Or if they what's your advice?
My first response is usually yes, exactly. Don't do this, do something else. It really is. Okay. I get that question all the time. So as I was speaking to students in Groningen University up in the Netherlands just last week, and of course that question came up, and I kind of joke and say, this is if you really want to contribute to to human rights, understand that there are a lot of people who want to do it, and it's an incredibly tough field to get into. And people do a lot of internships, paid internships, mind you, but still internships before they get an entry level kind of job, and it's really tough. And there are other ways to contribute to the cause. I mean, there are other people who really believe in human rights and have a little bit of money and then donate it to, Human Rights Watch, or donate to Amnesty or whatever, and support the cause that way. Or they help by, transmitting our materials on social media and helping the cause that way. There are other ways to support the cause of universal human rights around the world. Getting involved in the and the actual work of it day to day, it's difficult to break into, much more difficult now than it was when, when I started, whatever, 20, 25 years ago, in this sort of field. And I think the day-to-day job can be extremely difficult for reasons that we kind of, alluded to before. Like, we are talking about some of the worst things that happen around the world, the cruelty and the inhumanity and the just atrocities and the absolute horrific things that people do to one another around the world. And you're confronted with, some pretty dark stuff. And even if you're not there on the ground seeing it face to face, or talking to the victims even face to face, there is a kind of that secondary trauma that we're all on the lookout for and have to be careful of and have to kind of work through. It is not easy. It's there's a lot of burnout. People deal with not just that issue, but the desire to do something, to change something in the world for the better against a lot of odds, and quite honestly, not being able to a lot of the times. I mean, there's a lot of situations that we talk about that haven't really changed for a lot of years, and we're just really reporting on them so that someday when the political situation changes, we have this massive evidence that we can hand over to courts and prosecutors and everything else, so they can maybe get justice for the victims. But it's tough, and there are we have many dark days in a row before you have a success, and it's not an easy field in any respect. But when we do get a win, it feels good.
All right, so challenging. So think about it properly, experience it before, and I think be ready for being resilient to basically kind of be able to do that and hopefully help situations that you can change. Okay, now we have time for our recommendations.
So
the jingle was just coming.
Sorry, I forgot about the jingle. I'm so sorry.
No worries. Okay, so Andrew, what is your recommendation? I think
okay, so it's a good segue from what we were just talking about. So my recommendation is a book called Behave: The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst by Robert Sapolsky. So it looks like that. There you go. The reason I chose this is because it really helps to understand how human brains work. I mean, we're in the business, Phil, one way or the other, we're in the influence business, right? We're trying to influence people to do things that they might not otherwise do, governments and international organizations and individuals and so on, right? We're trying to convince them with the facts, with the narratives, with the stories, with the emotions, with the logic, with everything, to try to get them to take on a new policy or change a policy or to act in ways that are going to promote universal human rights. To understand how the human brain works is absolutely essential to understanding how to influence people, right? And how what arguments might work. What you're trying to reach that audience. What's going to happen? So Sapolsky takes in neurobiology. He takes in history and culture and primatology, all sorts of things, and he brings it all together into this synthesis of here's the things you should be thinking about. It's not really written for people like me in terms of people who want to do communications and whatnot, but the lessons that are in there are super, super interesting and useful for us. It's a guidebook to the human brain.
Yeah, fantastic book actually. And his next one, Determined,
yes,
goes deeply into the whole. Oh, you have it too. I mean, I find it fascinating both on a psychological and scientific perspective, but also on the implications for our ideas of morality and free will. That's another philosophical discussion that I think is definitely worth it. And he's a very, very eloquent writer on the topic. So thank you. That's a great recommendation. Also, he has a set of lectures that you can see free on YouTube, like a 13 lecture course that he gave. So it's fascinating. Irem, what is your recommendation this week?
My recommendation is also a book, and actually quite relevant to what we discussed before. It's called Twitter and Tear Gas by Zeynep Tüfekçi. It's a sociologist. She's a sociologist and a New York Times columnist and a fellow Turk. Her book explores how digital platforms and social media have transformed social movements, protests, and examining both the strength and also the shortcomings of these new forms of activism. And what she says and repeats a lot in the book is that technology is neither good nor bad, but it's actually not neutral either. It all depends on how you use it and the intentions of the user and the consumer. So that's quite interesting, and I think very relevant to what we discussed. Obviously, it's been a topic of conversation for more than a decade now. Some of the examples I think in the book are a bit outdated, but it's still a quite good read, I would say.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Thank you, Rem. My recommendation this week will be simply that you should register for the EU Influencer event taking place on the 20th of September, where Andrew hopefully will be joining us in person. And so
I will be there. Yep. I've registered. Yep.
Excellent. So you can meet people, a lot of different influencers, people who are spending that time trying to answer the questions of how to reach the right audience with the right channels. We have a lot of people signing up, so now we have a waiting list, but it's also going to be streamed. So we look forward to seeing you all there. So in the meantime, have a fantastic weekend, and we will see you online. Bye, everyone.